All right, good afternoon. I am Dr. Yu Sun with Our Lady of the Lake University, and I have here with me today is Dr. Esther Gergen. Welcome to the Department of Leadership Studies, our Leadership Excellence Group, that we offer the free webinar for the leadership topics monthly, basically. And today's webinar is we're going to talk about organizational culture and its effect and how leaders can shape it. Well, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us, especially during your lunch break. So we will be recording today's session. If as long as you register, then you should be able to receive a copy. Or if you did not register, just pop in through the link people forward to you, and then just shoot me an email. I'm going to send you a copy of the recording as well. Okay, to make sure that we have a nice, clear recording, and we ask you that you please make your mic is mute, and then we'll have questions, and then I'll mute everyone. Okay, and then as I said, I am Dr. Yu Sun. I am a professor of leadership study at Our Lady of the Lake University, and also serve as a director of leadership study program at our Houston campus. And a little bit about me. My doctoral education background is in management science and applied mathematics. And I have over 10 years of experience in leadership studies. And my major interests are leadership assessment, management, decision-making, business analytics. And also I want to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Esther Gergen. Dr. Gergen is a full professor of leadership study at Our Lady of the Lake University on our San Antonio campus. And she has over 15 years experience in academia and over 20 years in industry, where she focuses on a lot of industry training and then higher education, professional development. And her interest is leadership theory, ethics, strategies, emotional intelligence, and conflict management. I'm going to hand the mic to Dr. Gergen for herself to introduce a little bit more about herself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us today. We are super excited to have you. I, as Dr. Sun has said, am a colleague of hers in the Department of Leadership Studies at Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio, Texas. I happen to be based in San Antonio. Dr. Sun is in Houston. And as she mentioned, I have over 20 years of experience both in academia and in corporate or industry. And I'm so excited and privileged to be able to share some of that wisdom and insight with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for spending your time to give us this awesome topic today. Well, as we get started, again, I see people get in. Feel free to chat in the box and share who you are. Please let us know your name and where you're located, and then your current role or your organization. So we'd like to know more about you. I see some of us are old friends, and some of you maybe the first time. Please feel free to really chat and get to know each other. Okay, and then right. So we want to provide this webinar, but also want you to know who we are and then who our credential to provide all this service. And a little bit background I want to talk is our university. As I mentioned, Dr. Gergen and I are both with Our Lady of the Lake University, commonly referred to as OLU. And a few facts about OLU are listed here. First, we have been around for 128 years. And the Sisters of Congregation of Divine Providence broke ground in 1895 and established a private Catholic school, initially for women only. Now today, however, we are a co-educational SACS-accredited institution with 3 campuses, which are in San Antonio, Rio Grande Valley, and here where I am in Houston. And as for our Department of Leadership Study, we have been around here for almost 3 decades now. It began in 1998 in San Antonio and has graduated over 300 doctoral students. The Houston program opened in about 2010, and we have over about 100 doctoral alumni in the Houston area. And then for the department, it's part of the College of Business and Leadership, and it's ACBSP accredited, and it's only leadership study department in the H-Town that offers a leadership PhD. You might see some that are a concentration with leadership, but we are the only one that actually have a discipline in leadership and offer the degree in leadership studies. And we are a face-to-face cohort model that has a small faculty to student ratio, so students can easily collaborate with instructor and classmate. And we meet every other Saturday with our ED location for all 3 campuses. Well, just a few highlights of our program that we offer here in all 3 campuses. That we have 2-year trimester program for our Master of Science in Organizational Leadership degree. It's a HyFlex format, meaning student can take in person or through computer from anywhere. We also have the 4-year trimester PhD program in leadership study, and this is a face-to-face every other Saturday program. We also have some great dual degree options. Master student can get combined with MS in organizational leadership and MBA, or master students who know they want to have a PhD. They have a couple of choice, a combined MS in organizational leadership and PhD in leadership study, or MBA and PhD in leadership study. So those provide a lot of flexibility. In addition of this great flexibility of degree program, we also offer professional development training to organizations. And for questions about any of this, you're welcome to reach out to either of us. And this slide shows you some of our many affiliates, some of the area organization where our graduates work and lead. And you can see that our students have careers in a variety of fields. And I'm not sure if you can recognize your own organization, but this next slide are more of our valued affiliates. Okay, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those later when we have Q&A session. For now, I'm going to just turn it back to Dr. Gergen for today's topic.
Thank you, Dr. Soon. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited to share with you some insights about our topic today, which is a really important topic and one that very often organizations and individuals and everybody in leadership tend to wonder about, which is organizational culture. And we tend to think about it as just a topic in leadership, but really it is something to be understood, because culture can oftentimes take a life of its own in our organization. So we're going to talk today about how it affects and how leaders can shape it. So I'd like to start with a couple of quotes first to think about, kind of set our intention and think about a bird's eye view of what we're thinking about when it comes to organizational culture and how it's viewed by various organizations and people out there in the industry. So the first quote says, "Determine what behaviors and beliefs you value as a company and have everyone live true to them. These behaviors and beliefs should be so essential to your core that you don't even think of it as culture." As I mentioned, culture, we tend to think about something to be understood or studied, but really it can take a life of its own if it's managed correctly. And sometimes when not correctly managed, can also take a life of its own in the sense that it negatively affects organizations. Another quote says, "Corporate culture is the only sustainable competitive advantage that is completely within the control of the leader." And we'll circle back to that when we talk about the call to action for leaders when it comes to culture. But this alludes to the idea that it is very much an idea that leaders have to be really concerned about, and a dynamic that leaders have to be actively involved in shaping and managing. And then the final one says, "Performance more often comes down to a cultural challenge rather than simply a technical one." And again, that alludes to the fact that culture of an organization, a group, a society takes its own identity, kind of becomes its own participant in the group. And so it is oftentimes when we think about performance and how well we're doing as an organization, it comes down more to the dynamics of the culture than the actual technical things that are happening in an organization. So again, really important topic to understand. So today's featured work that will focus our ideas and perspective on culture are from a theorist and psychologist by the name of Edgar Schein. He was an American business theorist and psychologist. He was a scholar for the MIT Sloan School of Management and a pioneer of the contemporary field of what we know now as organizational culture. He played a major role in founding and advancing 5 different fields of knowledge, within which was organizational psychology, organization development, including what we're talking about today, which is organizational culture, and broadly group process and consultation in career development. So when you see the ideas throughout our discussion today, they're focused on the work of Edgar Schein. So level setting on this idea of culture will help us to kind of determine or kind of set a foundation for what we're considering when we're thinking about this idea of culture. So organizational culture typically is the behavior of humans who are part of the organization and the meanings that these individuals or humans or people attach to their actions within the organization. So culture can include the organization's values, the vision, the norms, the working language, the systems, symbols, beliefs, and habits. And when we think about those things from our own context, we can start to think about these words or language or norms that we tend to understand within our particular organization that may not necessarily be common outside. And we tend to use acronyms or speak in certain ways and use certain verbs and or descriptors within our organization that allude to this idea that we create these dynamics that are specific to the group. So organizational culture, we understand and we believe shapes the way that people act and interact, and thus strongly influences how things get done within the organization. When we think about culture from the perspective of the scholar Schein, we think about 4 different frames that establish culture or organizational dynamics within an organization. Culture can be viewed from vast different lenses, but this framework talks about 4 specifically that tend to exist in organizations. And so the first is structural. And you can see that in the structural frame, the things that are focused on by an organization include things like rules, the roles that everybody is assigned, the goals that the organization is working towards, very focused on policies or creating structure, the technology that enables these objectives, the environment that you're functioning in, the social architecture within which the organization functions. And it tends to be, from the structural frame, very focused or attuned to the structure or the task at hand. When we think about the human resource frame, this is more focused on the needs of people, the skills that are required from the people that are executing work, the relationships that are being formed, empowerment of employees. And then the focus in the human resource frame is to align the organizational needs to the human needs, to make sure that those are congruent and a good fit. If we now go then to the political frame of organizational culture, we see that there's a different focus on different items there. So in the political frame, there's a focus on power, how power works and how it's distributed or how it's navigated through. It's focused on how conflict takes place. Tends to be more of a focus on competition or the competitiveness of the environment. Also tends to be focused, as the frame is termed, on organizational politics or how those are maneuvered and worked through to accomplish things. There also tends to be a sort of focus on advocacy along with the political frame. And then also the main focus of the political frame is to develop an agenda for what needs to get done and what the power base is that'll help us to push forward the agenda. That tends to be the focus when you're functioning from a political frame as an organization. And then the 4th frame that we tend to look at is the symbolic frame. And if an organization and their culture is in the symbolic frame or functioning from that frame, then it's focused on things like culture of the individuals, the meanings that are placed on actions and behaviors, rituals that take place that mean something to the organization. It includes activities like ceremonies and stories. And in the symbolic frame, we tend to see the resurgence or the surgence of heroes. So there's stories, historical stories, or the culture is really focused on how did we get here, honoring the people that got us here, rich histories of those things. It also tends to be really focused on inspiration of the individuals in the organization. And so the frame or the objective in the symbolic frame is to create beauty and meaning of the things that are happening in the organization. These frames are not necessarily mutually exclusive, meaning that there doesn't have to be just one frame in an organization. Sometimes an organization has several of these focuses within the 4 frames. And also sometimes there's subcultures that form in an organization. So if, for example, organizations have departments or functional areas, oftentimes just because of the nature of the work or the nature of the objectives for each functional area, subcultures tend to form that may not be the same as the overall organizational culture. So let's talk a little bit about what it would look like from a descriptive perspective. So if we look at these 4 frames, in reference to 4 key things, we can start to see how they play out or how they're different. So if we look at the structural frame, the metaphor for that would be a factory or a machine kind of metaphor, where things are focused on creating structure so that we're functioning correctly and things are getting executed. The central concepts that tend to occur in the structural frame are, as we talked about earlier in the graphic, focusing on rules, roles, policies, and creating an environment where the structure allows us to accomplish. If we think about the image of leadership or how leadership is perceived in a structural frame, they're perceived as social architecture. So the leadership of the organization is perceived in their utility in creating a framework or a structure or an architecture for the organization and how they function. And then if we look at basic leadership challenges that tend to occur when there is a frame of structure in an organization's culture, the basic challenge is that the leadership needs to be attuned to attune the structure to the task, the technology, and the environment. So the challenge is ensuring that those structures and things that are being focused on are in congruence or linked to the task that they're trying to accomplish and the environment that they're functioning in. From a human resource frame, the metaphor would be more like family. Versus factory or machine in the structural phase, it would be more like creating a family in the culture. And so the central concepts, as we talked about, are fitting the needs of the organizations with the skills and the needs of people and focusing on the creation of functional and productive relationships. The image of leadership in a human resource is that leaders are there to empower people that have the skills to do the work that they need to do in order to meet the needs of both their personal accomplishments and the organization. And in the human resource frame, the basic leadership challenge is that leaders are tasked with aligning organizational and human needs, which often can be quite the challenge, as we all know. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. In the political frame, the metaphor would be a jungle. And it's just like it sounds, right? We think about politics and politicians. In the political frame, the culture functions very much from a competition type of survival of the fittest. And so the central concepts tend to be, like I talked about earlier in the graphic, power, competition, and organizational politics. The image of leadership in this kind of cultural frame, in the political frame, is that leaders are primarily advocates of what is needing to be done, sort of like we think about in Washington, lobbyists, but advocacy. And they also need to be politically savvy in this type of organizational culture frame. And then the basic leadership challenge is that leadership needs to develop an agenda and a power base that'll allow the organization to accomplish the things that they're trying to accomplish. Finally, in the symbolic frame, the metaphor we would think about is sort of a temple or a theater, maybe even a carnival, from the sense that we're creating this meaning and this experience in this cultural frame. And so we're focused on the central concepts of meaning, rituals, ceremonies, and creating this sort of inspirational, symbolic meaning for people in the organization. The image of leadership is that they're there to inspire, basically. And then the basic leadership challenge then becomes creating this meaning and this beauty. Oftentimes can be challenging when you're talking about day-to-day activities and you're talking about things that might not be as abstract that need to be accomplished, right? So there's some great things about each cultural frame and there's some tensions in each cultural frame. So I'm going to stop now and ask for a little bit of participation. If you will, in the chat, I'd like everyone that's joined us to think about, one, what might be the cultural frame that's most closely resembling the culture in your particular organization? And then two, how does that cultural frame in your mind, how have you seen it come to life in the behaviors and the dynamics of your and interactions of the organization and its constituents? So I'm going to take a look at the chat to see some of the ideas that we might be posting. So if you'll think about both of these questions, and then on the chat, tell us a little bit about which frame of the four that we just talked about might best be reflected in your organization right now? And then how has that frame come to life in the behaviors and the dynamics of the organization? So I'm trying to go to the bottom here to see if we have any feedback and or observations of cultural frame in your particular organization. Don't be shy. So I see some feedback now from, and I apologize because my, okay. So from Cristina Flores, you see a blend of structural and human resource in your organization. Human resource frame is often and structural from Roxanne. We also see from Jillian clan culture. That's kind of similar to the human resource, but a little bit more poignant in the idea that it's sort of that everybody's kind of following the same beat of perhaps the same drum. Jillian says human resource for sure. How does it come to life? So Judy H says it comes to life with technology. Interesting, the use of technology perhaps and the way we interact with technology definitely has become a big culture shaper for a lot of organizations in this particular decade, and with all the challenges that we've seen with the pandemic, right? Technology has become such a huge player in our culture, and not only a player, but really has taken a life of its own. Kim says structural and HR in her organization looks like it tends to be a trend for everyone. Jillian said very people oriented. Roxanne is saying rules are important because of state and compliance in her context. Yes, very much so. And so the structural frame does tend to form in organizations that do have a lot of regulation and a lot of accreditation that they need to meet across industries, right? We see that in education, we see that in healthcare. So the structural frame is often a common one. And it is because the structural frame is kind of a baseline for what we do, right? Getting things accomplished requires frameworks, structure, direction. Perhaps managing things requires policies, right? And so the structural frame is often very common. And hopefully, as organizations evolve, we start to see other frames like the human resource or maybe even the symbolic as organizations become a little more mature. And so Guadalupe said that there is sort of a structural frame, right? Let's see here. Let me pull back up. So Guadalupe Marquez, thank you for your input. It says structural and political, it's a law firm. Yes, and there's always a fine line with working with the law and the organization's commitment to their staff. Absolutely. From a law firm perspective, we can easily see how structural would be a baseline, and then of course political, right? In the legal system, there is a lot of competition, a lot of trying to figure out the power base that we talked about in that particular frame. So thank you so much, everyone, for your input. These are the ways that we can tend to identify the culture, the dynamics, the characteristics of our culture, and then try to understand how they are affecting our everyday work, but more importantly, how they're affecting the way that we interact with each other, the way that we come together to accomplish things, and how leadership takes a key role in trying to move the culture and shape it. And we'll talk a little bit about shaping culture in a second. So why do we want to know what frame? Why do we want to know what our culture is? Why do we want to put some texture and definition to it, right? And it's because culture does have some major effects on the organization, right? There are times where we don't actually think about it as its own entity, but it is really its own entity and a force that the organization can either use for productivity and creating climates that are great and effective, or the opposite, right? Where climates that are not so great and perhaps lack productivity. So some of the negative outcomes of negative work cultures include hyper competition, right? We talked about the political frame, and that's kind of embedded in that frame. But there can be a situation where there can be situations where culture is functioning in a way that creates hyper competition or excessive competition. There are also opportunities where negative work cultures can create bullying behavior, especially if you're in a culture of competition. There's also situations where it can create low employee engagement when an employee's personal values or personal desires for interaction and the personal needs do not fit the organization's culture or the way the culture is functioning, the actual dynamic of the organization. Employees often disengage or kind of isolate themselves because of that incongruence between what they're believed to be their values and what they want to accomplish and the organization. There also tends to be high absenteeism in work. I just want to make sure that we have sound again. I think we might have lost sound.
I'm here. Can you hear us? Can you all hear us?
Yes, I think we're back. Sorry about that. I'm not sure how that happened. Okay, great. So with regards to positive work cultures, we see quite the opposite, right? So increased productivity, really important for every single organization. Improved business agility, that's that opposite of the lack of flexibility. Agility means that when things come in the environment and we're required to change, we can do it quickly and we can do it as effectively as possible. People tend to come together to flex and to make the changes and create the changes that need to happen. It also includes high employee engagement. When you have positive work culture, employees tend to be focused on the organizational purpose. In leadership, we all know that that's ultimately the big goal of leadership, right? To lead people to a common purpose. And so when we have a great positive organizational culture, it tends to be easier for individuals to become a collaborative group towards a common purpose. We also, studies and research have also shown that Positive work cultures generate high financial performance, which of course is important to everyone. And then they tend to have clear competitive advantages. So the idea of competitive advantage is that there's a skill set or a dynamic or a characteristic of an organization that can't easily be replicated by other organizations in the same industry. Culture is one of those things that can create a real competitive advantage if done right, because it's not easy to imitate, and culture is also very slow and difficult to change. So as we think about shaping culture, we got to remember that shaping culture is time intensive, and it takes a bit to get it to the shape we want it in, or to get it to a different state. And so when we do reach a state of positive work cultures where people are collaborative, they're agile, they feel a part of the organization, then that creates a real competitive advantage for the organization that is not easy for others to replicate. So I keep mentioning this idea about shaping culture, and oftentimes when we are in a situation where we've identified that our organizational culture is needing some changes or needing some improvements, there are actually mechanisms that Shine talks about that can be used to try to shape culture and move it to where we want to move it. And so there are both primary and secondary mechanisms. And the primary mechanisms are the main ways by which leaders affect cultural change through their own visible actions. These are primary mechanisms. So the first one he talks about is attention. Attention to, meaning that what leaders focus and pay attention to tends to shape how the organization's constituents move their focus as well. So the values, beliefs, priorities, and so on of a leader appear where they place their attention. So followers or the constituents tend to look at the leader and what they are focused on and pay close attention to how the leader reacts, how the leader engages. So when a leader gets particularly passionate or on the opposite, annoyed, then followers assume that the subject being attended to is important, right? So this idea of attention. So as leaders, we need to be very intentional on what we provide both positive and negative attention to, because it does speak to our constituents about what's important. The second is reaction to crisis. In a crisis, people's deeper values are exposed. So for example, when they go into self-preservation, or when they're gallantly seek to help others first, right? Those are behaviors that tend to shape the culture. So the higher level of emotion in a crisis also means that we'll remember what happens then more than other times. So leaders, when we're thinking about crisis, for example, in a crisis, the leader's actions will be both remembered and also taken to be truer examples of who they are and what they really desire, mean, value, than in times outside of a crisis. So reactions to crisis are a really important mechanism for how we shape culture with our constituents. The third is role modeling, and we've all heard of role modeling. It's a big topic in leadership, but in general in organizations. So people tend to listen to leaders, and they also watch carefully what leaders do. When there's a conflict between what they say and what they do, they believe the leader's actions before the words. Really important idea to take away, right? So role modeling is all about making sure that our words match our actions, because when they don't, we need to be aware that what our constituents will believe is what we do versus what we say, right? People also tend to assume the behavior of a leader is what's right and will emulate them, generally speaking, right? So how leaders behave is how their followers will tend to behave as well. The allocation of rewards is another primary mechanism for shaping culture. And basically this means that rewards from praise to promotion are assumed to reflect what the organization wants, more importantly, what leadership wants, but overall what the organization wants, right? As well as the results that are being sought. So if a cultural change is if a culture wants to change to more collaborative behavior, then someone that gets a bonus for achieving outstanding results, but using individualistic or selfish behavior, then the selfish behavior is assumed to be okay. Because remember, we believe what we see, not what we hear, right? And so to change the culture, it would be necessary in this example for leaders or the people that are doing things that are not collaborative to somehow be corrected or course corrected rather than rewarded for that. And then the last primary mechanism for shaping culture is criteria for selection and dismissal. So really key important takeaway is that recruitment, promotion, or dismissal from organizations are both critical for choosing who joins the organization, and also within extreme forms of reward and punishment, right? So the criteria used should consider the style and personality, as well as the competence of the person that we're choosing, right? Oftentimes when we're making hiring decisions, we don't really think about it as a way to shape the culture, but we do want to really be aware and intentional about how the person is a cultural fit for the culture that we're trying to create. And so this is one of the primary mechanisms as well. There are some secondary mechanisms for shaping culture, and these are less focused and less directly visible, but things like the way we design the structure of the organization, not just from a physical structure of the actual buildings that we function in, but also from a structure of the organization. How is the leadership and the organization structured, and does it aid in actually creating the culture that we want, right? So first we create our organizations, and then they create us is kind of an infamous quote that we can think about here. So the hierarchical shape of an organization will have subtle effects on how you operate. So if we want a very fluid, organic type of culture or dynamic, then the structure of the leadership has to reflect that, right? Where it's flatter, perhaps more matrix than the traditional hierarchical. And that just depends on the objectives and the dynamics in the organization. There's also things like design of the systems and procedures, not much different from the organizational structure, but designing how we function. So if there's things that are happening within the organization that are making us less productive, going back to see how are we designing the systems and the procedures that we follow. And if those systems and procedures allow for more room for interpretation, perhaps that gives us that organic feel that we want, or vice versa, if we're trying to create a culture that's more set on rules because we have accreditation and legal things to consider, then we might pull back and provide less room for interpretation on things. Again, I talked about design of facilities. If we want people to interact and be more collaborative, we might have cubicles that are open versus offices that are closed. Just one example, right? Also, when we talk about the different political frames, the different organizational culture frames, and we talked about the symbolic frame and this idea of stories, legends, and myths. The stories that people tell and retell in an organization typically tend to reflect the values and beliefs of the culture. So changing the stories that we're telling to shape the culture is also an effective way. And then, of course, formal statements, especially when we think about crisis and reaction to crisis. Formal statements by the organization, by leadership, although not always as credible as grassroots whisperings, are the public face of the organization. And so they demand very much intention and attention to how we're responding to things formally in formal statements and formal announcements. That is also a secondary mechanism for shaping culture. So let's talk a little bit about, before we go to the leadership call to action, and let's go back to the chat and see if any of these primary or secondary mechanisms resonate with anybody. Have you all seen these? Does any one of these stand out to you as, oh my gosh, we really need to think about that mechanism for changing our culture, especially those of you that mentioned that you're very structural, and or that you're very human resource oriented. Any of these mechanisms that tend to resonate, that you're either thinking, maybe that's something we should try, or that you're thinking, we kind of tried that and I'm not sure that it's taken. And I'm just going to keep the chat up here to see if there's any insights from each of you and your organizations on these mechanisms and what you're using. So while we wait for any of those comments, I'm going to go ahead and move forward to what's important, right? Which is, what is the call to action with this thing called culture, right? What is the call to action for us as leaders, for us as constituents, and for us as organizations, right? And the key call to action is kind of threefold, right? I think it's important for us to take away that leadership is the key to learning, right? So when we think about culture, a big component of culture and how we shape it and how we function in is that we learn, that as an organization and as individual constituents that come together, that there's learning occurring with regards not only to leadership, but to culture. The second key call to action is that learning occurs through leaders who use their personal power to demand some new behavior directed towards achieving a common purpose. So if leadership is the key to learning, then as leaders, we have to be aware that this learning that is essential from a cultural perspective has to occur through us as leaders and constituents, but more importantly, that leaders are using their power, their influence, their stake in the organization to demand, very intentional word, to really expect, demand, make it a priority to have behaviors that are directed towards achieving that common purpose. Because when we don't see those behaviors and we're saying that we have a culture or we want a specific culture, then we, in essence, are creating a culture gap instead of the actual culture that we're trying to, right? And so I'm just going to share. Judy H. mentioned that we moved 19 groups into one facility to inspire multidisciplinary collaboration. It really does work. One of those secondary forms of shaping culture. Great. Thank you for sharing, Judy. And finally, the key call to action that I want everybody to resonate with, that I want ringing in your ears as you depart from us today, is that culture of an organization is because leadership is the key to learning, and learning occurs only through leaders who demand these new behaviors and are actually role modeling them themselves. Then culture of an organization is the responsibility of the organization's leadership. Really important. It is the responsibility not just of, and more importantly, of the top person in an organization, but of the leadership team of the organization. It's not the responsibility of individuals in the organization, it's the responsibility of the leadership. Really important takeaway. When an organization wants to see a specific culture and a specific climate, it's the responsibility of leaders to work on either creating it or to nurture one if it's already existing. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions in general. And I'm going to open up the chat here, but also I think Dr. Soon is going to unmute everyone so that anyone who wants to ask a question can do so.
Yeah, you're on mute. Feel free to unmute from your side and feel free to ask question, or feel free to write down anything in the chat box.
I have our chat box open. And we'll keep it open for questions, and or you can chime in as you'd like. But while we do that, in case any come in, I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Dr. Soon for the next part of our presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Gergen, for the awesome presentation and for sharing this important way that we can use leadership to help with our organizational culture. Well, I'd like to take a few minutes to share our future events, and please mark your calendar. So for this webinar, upcoming webinar for the fall 2023 or spring 2024, our next one is February 20th, 2024, which is our academic spring semester. And the topic right now is Leading Virtual Works, What Research Tell Us. And then if you have some topic that you're particularly interested or your organization are interested, please feel free to write down in the chat box or shoot us email, and then we will consider, we'll take that consideration into our future events and topics. And then next spring, we're really planning some exciting things about Leadership Excellence Panel that we have nailed down for 2 dates, which is March 19th, with the topic of leading teams through change. And then the second panel will be April 16th. We're considered to do servant leadership, and how does that work in the large organization. And again, so I'll provide all the registration information later, but feel free to shoot us email for any interest topic that you'd like to hear. All right, and then to schedule any event about specific topic or like professional training, please feel free to shoot me an email, or here is my phone number and just call me. All right, so we are currently leading for the fall 2024. We're now at the early admission that for PhD program, and for well, for the PhD program, we can like enroll every year in the fall, but for master it's every semester. Okay, and then more information you can get from our info session that is November 8th, which will be tomorrow. And then there will also be instant decision event for all 3 campuses with different schedule. And then for the next one, the one I mentioned in February 20th, leading virtual work, what researchers tell us. So feel free to take a moment to scan the QR code, and then that should help you to direct you to the registration for the webinar, or you can use the link to register for that. Okay, and our next one is the panel that I mentioned. This panel will be on March, I believe it's 16th or 19th. Yeah, March 19th. So I need to update this date. It's March 19th. Again, take a few seconds to scan the code. This should direct you for the registration for the panel. And we will invite some of our alumni from the PhD program who's also serve as the leadership position to share their insight about how they utilize the leadership skills they learned from our program, and also into their daily work in the organization, and how they actually use those strategies to go through the changes. Okay, and then so next one, this is the one that I mentioned about the info session that we offer tomorrow. This will be tomorrow at noon time. Again, here is a barcode. Please feel free to scan it. And then it's from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and it's virtual. It's really good to get a lot of information about our program, how what are the schedule, what is the norms, what's the hours, and then what do you can learn from the program. So I highly encourage you, if you're interested about any of our program, whether it's master or PhD, please feel free to join us and make the reservation. All right, so the instant decision would follow with the info session. If you're interested about any of the program, we do offer in-person meeting with each of you. That right now, San Antonio campus, if you're in San Antonio area or easy to access to the San Antonio campus, that instant decision event is on November the 9th, which is this in 2 days. This Thursday is from 4 to 7 p.m. And then there's ISVP link. I will also give you this link when we're done with this, along with the recording. And for RGV, which is Rio Grande Valley area, the instant decision event is also the 9th from 4 to 7. Now, if you're in Houston area, then we offer the in-person kind of like info session or instant decision that is on November the 13th from 4:30 to 6:30. Just want to add a little bit about the instant decision, meaning that if you're interested from tomorrow's info session, you want to really take advantage of the early admission, then you can bring all the documents, and then there's an interview conducted while we meet. So you can get the result or the decision from the faculty who interviewed, and then to see your admission decision. Okay. All right, so this next slide is kind of like talks to you the overview of our PhD program, the journey of the 4 year. It's a 4-year program, and it's a trimester. Each year we'll have a fall, spring, and summer. And you can see there's a different focus. It's a courses focus, dissertation focus, and community on different years and I believe part of Dr. Gergen's topic today is related to this 9320 organizational leadership. And then some of other topic we have discussed in our webinar are also very important knowledge you will learn from this program. Okay, all right. And okay, a few more points that again that we are we offer master and a PhD program in the leadership studies, and in 3 campuses, Houston, San Antonio, and RGV, and we're the only leadership study department that offers a PhD in leadership studies. Okay, and it's a face-to-face cohort model with a small faculty to student ratio to really encourage the collaboration and with other professionals. And we meet every other Saturday, so you can't miss. You can still have a weekend with your family or other things you committed. Okay, and then it's a 2-year trimester program for master, and then 4-year trimester program for PhD. And then we offer a lot of dual degree options. Well, again, if you have any questions in terms of the program, just feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Gergen. All right, so we will send out all the participated, or if you registered and were not able to make it, we'll send you the recording of today's webinar. And then we will also give you the info session flyers if you didn't get time to really, fill in through the bar, the QR code earlier. Then you can use this information to fill in the information. And we will also share some information about the upcoming event for you to register. And please share our information with your colleagues, friends, or families. We do offer professional development and then all the degree, master or PhD program in leadership studies. And be sure to follow us for all our events. Okay. Right, and then there might be, after you log off from the webinar, the WebEx, there might be a survey popped up. If it does, please complete the short satisfaction survey when you disconnect. Well, thank you so very much. And then me and Dr. Gergen will still online to ask any questions. If you want to stay a little bit or have any questions, feel free to stay. But with that, thank you so very much. We look forward to see you next time.
Thank you everyone for joining us. It was a pleasure. We hope you take away some great insights.